G'day and welcome to another video with Better Pics. Hope this finds you all well. Today we're just going to look at converting raw images, or any image really, to black and white through Adobe Lightroom. Adobe Lightroom, like Adobe Camera Raw, has a lot of great options when you're editing raw images, and all of them really allow you to take that full advantage of the flexibility that a raw image workflow allows you to have. So certainly from a shadow and highlight recovery, as well as flexibility with color and specific tonal ranges throughout the image, it really is a great way to go. While it is a little bit more work, it offers you the flexibility that only a raw workflow can allow. Traditionally, images would often be converted to black and white through Photoshop, but now with Adobe Camera Raw and particularly Lightroom as well, the flexibility and options for converting to black and white really are a good way to go because you do have that flexibility. Alright, so let's jump into it. So this is an image that I photographed when I was travelling in Scotland. This is a little coffee shop in Edinburgh, and it was a lovely little coffee shop. The thing I really liked about it, not only the light sort of streaming in through that top window on the top right hand side, but the softness of the light outside and the resulting softness of the light inside as well. So not only the usual textures and style that you would expect to see in a small coffee shop, but I love the texture on the wall on the left hand side as well. It really is quite lovely. The nice thing about the softness of the light as well is that the detail in the image is really retained right across. So the only place that I've really lost detail is in that window in the top right hand side, which, to be honest, I'm really not too concerned about. The shadows are all intact, and the image, certainly from an exposure perspective, there's nothing that I would have changed. So just the same with Adobe Camera Raw, there's a couple of ways that you can convert the image to black and white, and one of the ways to do that is simply within the Develop module, drop the saturation down to -100, and that gives us an image that's black and white. Obviously removing all the color saturation turns it to black and white, but we're going to look at a slightly better way. So I'm just going to click that back to 0, and what we're going to do is up here again on the Develop module is there's an option for either color or black and white. You can see color is currently highlighted. We're going to go over to black and white. Now, the reason that we're going to use that option is because we're telling Lightroom that we want to treat this image as a black and white, and it just changes a few of the options that are available to us when we're editing. Firstly, you can see that vibrance and saturation have been grayed out, so we can't actually use those as an option anymore, which makes sense because we're treating it as a black and white, which means there's no color, which means there's no point in trying to treat color that's not actually there. But the interesting thing is if we go down to where hue, saturation and luminance normally is, this has changed over to what's called black and white mix. So this is very, very similar to the options that are in Adobe Camera Raw when you're working with an Adobe monochrome color profile. We have all of these color channels to work with, and they allow us to change different color channels or color frequencies within the image, but obviously while the image is a black and white. So Lightroom knows that that color is there, so you can work with specifically the red frequency. Even though as a black and white we're not going to see red, you still have the option to work with the red that was originally in that image, which really, when you think about it, is fantastic. It's amazing that we can strip all the color, but we can still work with the color from a black and white image perspective. Hope that makes sense. So if, say for example, we just drop the red down, you can see that the red, what would have been red in the image, is being adjusted. There's only very little in there. Red, orange and yellow. You can see what will most affect skin tones. So in this case the orange is affecting, say for example, this gentleman's skin tones right here. You can see that as well as other parts of the image, obviously. Keeping in mind that any color that you see in a photograph is generally made up of multiple colors. It's not just a straight red or a straight yellow, which isn't really surprising when you think about it, unless you're photographing a color chart, which is pure color. Most of the color that you're going to see in an image, or at least be working with, will be made up of multiple colors. So again, we can just continue to adjust those colors. Being that this was a fairly flat image, they're not having a huge effect on the resulting image, but certainly we can make some adjustments to get the image to where we want it to be. So as with any raw image, you still have that flexibility for your basic adjustments like exposure and contrast. Now, looking at temperature and tint as well, again, with a black and white image, you wouldn't expect it to have much of an effect, but if we just, for experiment's sake, adjust that temperature and tint, you can see that it actually is having an effect on the image, not only on the brightness values, but also the tonal range of specific areas of the image. So again, Lightroom knows that in the background there, or the base raw file is a color image, and that temperature and tint does have an effect, which is quite interesting. My recommendation is always just to experiment with this sort of stuff, because you never know what effect you're going to get. And I really like the idea that there's not a blanket approach to image making or image editing. Looking at those different adjustments, even though they may not primarily seem like a sensible or a standard way to go, it's worth experimenting, because you never know what effect they might have. And specific to this image, it can become quite unique in the effect that you end up with. So moving on, exposure, normal brightness values, and contrast, depending on how much contrast you want to put in there. Highlights, obviously we can recover some of that highlight of the sun streaming through that top window. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of flat, obvious attempt at recovery of highlights. So when I was sitting there, that was a bright light coming through, which the sun is, so I'm going to keep it that way. My style of editing, I tend to try and keep images close to what I saw at the time, or what I felt I experienced, which obviously is different for everyone. But I'm not huge on really making the images hugely different to what they were. The reason that I take images is because I respond to what I see, so I try to stay true to that response, what it was that kind of initiated my want to take a photograph. And certainly for an image like this, I just love the style and the feel of the inside of small coffee shops like this, particularly in old cities, so I really want to maintain that feeling. So I'm just going to increase my contrast a little bit, because I love this as a bit of a contrasty image. I'm going to reduce the highlights a little bit and a little bit more in the shadows, so that we still have the beautiful dynamic range, but with quite a bit of contrast as well. You also obviously have the option for tone curves, which is a great way to edit, because you have, once again, control over all parts of the image. And Lightroom has some specific tools that are available, so where you can, using sliders as well as a tone curve, affect the highlights, the lights, darks and shadows, which is a great way to go. I'm not going to use it for this particular image, but the option is certainly there if you want to. So split toning, I'm going to keep it as a black and white, so I'm not going to touch split toning today. Detail sharpening, I'm going to sharpen this image up a little bit. This was actually shot on a Fuji camera, so I'm not going to give it a huge amount of sharpening, because I kind of like the grainy film look. And I'm just going to, pressing down my Alt key, increase the masking so that I'm not applying sharpening to all parts of the image, only to the edges that I want to. Obviously it switches the image over to that black and white, well, not a black and white image, but the black and white kind of highlighting of the edges that are having the sharpening applied to them. So yep, I'm pretty happy with that. And noise reduction, I'm actually not going to reduce the noise, because I kind of like this image to have a little bit of a gritty feel, and a little bit of noise is not a bad thing for the the detail that I'm trying to capture. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and have a look. Yep, love all that. It's nice and clean, so I'm not going to reduce any noise. There's not a lot of noise there anyway, but certainly I'm happy with the tonal range of that image. Alright, not going to worry about lens correction or chromatic aberration, as I have that set in my camera. Anyway, post-crop vignetting I do use a little bit occasionally. I'm not going to for this image because I kind of like where the light and shadow falls within this image. It's got a natural, from the top right to the bottom left, sort of stream of light that's coming in, which naturally falls off in the bottom right and the top left of the image. So I'm just going to leave that as it is, because the brightness values and the lighting of this image is really where I want it to be. So yeah, there's not a huge number of changes that I've made there, but certainly you can see by having a raw file in Lightroom and then working on it as a black and white image gives us some tools which are really handy and help us to refine that image in the way that we want to. So yeah, great option, worth considering. Lightroom, as always, a powerhouse of image editing. It's not all things, it doesn't do everything, but it certainly is a great way to have an efficient workflow to be able to create the images that you would like to. The nice thing about Lightroom as well is that they have a list of built-in presets. So for example, over on the left hand side of the screen here you can see that they have a bunch of presets across color as well as black and white. Obviously for the black and white one today we're looking at the black and white options. So as just a standard conversion, as you can see that it is now, but if you start to scroll through, this can give you a good starting point if you want to look at different effects that are available as a built-in option with Lightroom. Heaps of options available. I still prefer to manually kind of edit everything to where I want it to be, because it just gives me a little bit more refined control, but there's certainly some good options there if you want to explore them. Hope this has been helpful today, and look forward to seeing you all in the future. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions in the comments, and if there's any specific videos you want to see in the future, let me know. Thanks again, and look forward to seeing you again. Take care.